unseasonably warm English weather. On a narrow bridge in Yorkshire, a massive army is caught, off guard. Most of them aren't wearing their armor. They left it on their ships because they thought they had already won. Standing tall among them is a man who looks like he was carved out of granite. He is nearly 7 feet tall, a giant for his time. He is 50 years old, but he fights with the ferocity of a man half his age. His name is Harald Sigurdsson, but history knows him by a different name, a name earned through decades of blood, fire, and gold. Hardrada, the Hard Ruler. He has traveled further than any Viking before him. He has served emperors, fought in the deserts of the Middle East, and ruled Norway with an iron fist. He is the ultimate Viking, the final boss of the Viking Age. And in about 1 hour, an arrow is going to strike him in the throat. When that arrow lands, it doesn't just kill a king, it kills an entire era. It marks the precise moment history turned a page, from the age of sea wolves and raiders to the age of knights and nations. This is the story of the last Viking king and why the world simply ran out of room for men like him. To understand the end, we have to look at the beginning, and Harald's beginning was a disaster. Imagine being 15 years old. You look up to your older brother, King Olaf. You join him in a battle to defend his throne. The Battle of Stiklestad. You fight bravely, but you lose badly. Your brother is killed. You are wounded. You are now a fugitive with a price on your head. Most people would hide in a cave. Harald, he decides to go east. This is where the story starts to sound like a fantasy novel. Harald flees across the Baltic Sea to the Kievan Rus, modern-day Russia, and Ukraine. The Vikings called it Gardariki. He spends his late teens, not sulking, but training. He becomes a military commander for the Grand Prince of Kiev, but Harald has an ambition that Russia can't satisfy. He wants wealth, he wants power, and in the 11th century, there was only one city where you could find both in unlimited supply. Miklagard, the great city, Constantinople. Harald arrives in Constantinople and joins Varangian Guard. If you don't know who they are, think of them as the elite Secret Service, the Byzantine Emperor. If the Secret Service carried massive axes and were allowed to drink on the job, they were an elite unit composed almost entirely of Scandinavians and Englishmen. They were loyal only to money and the emperor, in that order. Harald doesn't just join them, he dominates them. He spends the next decade fighting everywhere. He fights Arab pirates in the Mediterranean. He fights in Sicily. He fights in Bulgaria. He even escorts pilgrims to Jerusalem, clearing the roads of bandits with extreme prejudice. He earns a nickname, the Thunderbolt of the North. But here's the key. Harald wasn't just a brute, he was a poet. We actually have surviving poetry written by him. Imagine a specialized soldier today, writing sensitive poetry about his feelings, while actively clearing a trench. It's a strange duality. He wrote verses about how the girl back in Russia wouldn't look at him, even though he was conquering the world. Relatable, right? Even Viking warlords had relationship issues. By the time he's ready to leave, Harald has amassed a fortune that is practically impossible to calculate. He has been skimming off the top of the emperor's taxes, looting cities, and saving his pay. But when he tries to leave, the Empress Zoe says no, she imprisons him. So, naturally, he breaks out, steals a ship, and smashes through the massive chain, guarding the Golden Horn Harbor. He returns to the north, not as a refugee, but as the richest man in Europe. Harald returns to Norway in 1046. His nephew, Magnus the Good, is currently king. Harald walks up to him and essentially makes an offer. Magnus can't refuse. I have more gold than you have dirt. Let's share the kingdom. I'll give you half my gold. You give me half the throne. Magnus, who is broke and needs money to pay his army, agrees. A year later, Magnus conveniently dies. Now, Harald is the sole king. This is where he earns the name Hardrada. He spends the next 15 years fighting a grueling, pointless war with Denmark. He burns villages, he purges rebellious nobles, he creates a strong, centralized monarchy. But by 1066, he's getting older. He's 50. In Viking years, that's ancient. Peace is boring him. The war with Denmark ends in a stalemate. He needs one last conquest, one last blaze of glory. And then he gets a visitor, Tostig Godwinson, the exiled brother of the new English king. Tostig says, "England is weak. You should take it." 1066 is the most famous year in English history. The old king dies childless. Harald Godwinson takes the throne, but William of Normandy wants it. And now, Harald Hardrada wants it too. Hardrada invades the north of England. With 300 ships, it is a massive force. He smashes the local resistance at the Battle of Fulford. He captures York. He feels invincible. He tells the English hostages to bring him supplies and hostages to a place called Stamford Bridge. On September 25th, Hardrada is waiting. He's relaxed. He left his heavy armor on the ships because it was a hot day. Suddenly, a cloud of dust appears on the horizon. It's not hostages. It's the entire English army. King Harald Godwinson had marched his troops 185 miles in 4 days, a superhuman feat of endurance. He caught the Vikings completely by surprise. Before the fighting starts, an English rider rides up to the Vikings. He offers Tostig, Hardrada's ally, his earldom back if he switches sides. Tostig asks, "And what will you offer my friend, Harald Hardrada, if he leaves?" The rider replies with one of the hardest lines in history. "We will give him 7 feet of English ground, or perhaps a little more, seeing as he is taller than most men." The rider was King Harald Godwinson himself. The battle was a massacre. The Vikings fought like demons. There is a legend of a single Viking holding the bridge alone, killing 40 Englishmen before being stabbed from below the bridge. But without their armor, they were doomed. In the chaos, Hardrada is fighting in a berserker rage, hacking men down with a two-handed sword. He is turning the tide by sheer force of will. And then, thwack, an arrow pierces his throat. The giant falls. The English king offers the remaining Vikings mercy. They refuse. They choose to die beside their king. Of the 300 ships that sailed to England, only 24 were needed to carry the survivors home. Harold's death was the death of the Viking Age. After him, Scandinavian kings stopped being sea raiders and started being European monarchs. They built churches, not longships. They signed treaties, not death warrants. Hardrada was a man out of time, a relic of an older, bloodier world trying to exist in a new one. He lived like a legend, and he died like one. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the end of the Viking Age, you might like my previous video on the last samurai, another warrior class that refused to fade away quietly. Click here to watch that and let me know in the comments. If Hardrada had worn his armor that day, would 1066 have ended differently?